So primary sources means what? The data or information which is collected by the researcher for the first time. So it is also called as raw data. So which are the two types of secondary data, that is internal secondary data as well as external secondary data. So census and registration detail supplies necessary information for research activity. So this is also one of the main sources of secondary data. Hello everyone, I am Harshita, lecturer, Department of Commerce, Vidyashram First Grade College, the Temple of Excellence, Mysore. My dear students, today we are in the fourth session of Unit 3 of the subject Business Research Method, and the Unit 3 is all about data collection. So your Unit 3 is data collection. So we have already discussed few of the concepts under this particular unit, that is we were discussing about various sources of primary data. So let us quickly recall what we have discussed in a previous session. So in a previous session I have covered this topic. So under primary sources of data, so which are the types there? So under primary sources, so there are mainly two methods. That is, one is observation method and other one is communication method. So these are the main two sources within which primary sources of data or primary data can be collected. Now under observation method we have studied about audit method. And the second method was recording method. And the third one is behavioral studies. So these are the main types which comes under observation method. That is, the primary sources of collecting the data has been divided into two types. One is observation method, other one is communication method. Under observation method we are having three types, that is audit method, recording method as well as behavioral studies. So these all methods we have discussed in detail, and in communication method also we are having mainly four types of communication methods. That is personal interview method, telephone interview, mail interview as well as panel interview. So this was also the topic which was discussed in a previous session. So this is all about your primary sources of collecting the data. In today's session, we shall discuss about secondary sources of collecting the data. Now, what do you mean by sources here? So, for each and every research work, we need some data or information. So, from where we are going to collect? So, either we can go for primary sources of data or secondary sources of data. So, primary sources means what? The data or information which is collected by the researcher for the first time. So, it is also called as raw data. So, it is identified by the researcher for the first time. They are called as primary sources of data. So these are the various types of primary sources of data. Under that we have observation method, and under communication method we have all these four types. So this is about primary sources. Now in today's session we shall discuss about one more sources of data, that is secondary sources of data. Now what is this secondary data? I have told you primary data means what? These are the information or the data which is collected by the researcher for the first time. They are termed as what? Primary data. Now coming to the secondary data, the data already collected by other person or organization. Now here it is not the raw data where the researcher is going to collect for the first time. So it is already collected by other person or organization are called as secondary data. Hope you know the main difference between primary data as well as secondary data. Under primary data, the data are information or data or information which is collected by the researcher for the first time. Whereas coming to the secondary data, so these are the information or the data which is already found out by some other person. So which is already collected by other person or organization are called as secondary data. This data is available in various forms. Let us see where do we get this secondary data. So, it may be from the press report, articles published in the daily newspapers, periodicals, journals and publication from universities, educational institutions, publication by local bodies. So, from there the researcher is going to take the information. So, they are termed as what? Secondary data. Now, secondary data is of two types, that is internal secondary data as well as external secondary data. So, which are the two types of secondary data, that is internal secondary data as well as external secondary data. Now, here the word itself tells that internal means what? The data which is collected, that is the secondary data which is collected from the organization, that is inside the organization, are called as internal secondary data. Whereas coming to the external one, so it is collected from the outside, that is outside the organization. So, this is about secondary data. So, let us discuss one by one about internal secondary data as well as external secondary data. Now, what do I mean by internal secondary data? I have told you internal means what? Inside. So, here the secondary data which is collected inside the organization. So, the data generated within an organization, that is inside an organization, is termed as internal secondary data. Hope you know about secondary data. So, it is not fresh data. It has been already published or it is already collected by some other person or organization itself. So, if the researcher is going to collect that information internally, that is within the organization, they are termed as what? Internal secondary data. So, this data is used to compare the previous marketing techniques. So, normally what happens, the internal secondary data will be used in the marketing activities. So, this data will be used to compare the previous marketing techniques or to determine the firm's competitive position in the industry. So, in order to check, so what was the previous marketing techniques? So, it will be compared with the current year marketing techniques. So, in order to compare from the previous year to the current year as well as from current year to the next year, so this internal secondary data is being used. So, internal secondary data is available in ready-made format at no cost. Now, I have already told you, so it has been already collected by some other person. It's not like primary data where the researcher has to go to individual person or through mail interview or through telephone interview, he has to collect the information. So, it is a costly as well as time consuming process. But when compared to secondary data, it is a ready-made data. It has been already collected by some other person. So, it is less consuming, at the same time it is less costly when compared to primary data. It will be in the ready-made format at no cost. And internal secondary data, sales analysis and invoice analysis are considered as chief data resources. Now, here also under internal secondary data, the main thing we are going to consider is invoice analysis as well as sales analysis. So, let us see what is this sales analysis and invoice analysis in internal secondary data. Now, coming to the sales analysis. So, I have already told you this internal secondary data will be used to compare the marketing techniques from that of previous year to current year and at the same time from current year to the next year. Now, what is this sales analysis? Sales analysis is specifically or specially important to carry out marketing research. So, in order to do the marketing research in a broad way, this internal secondary data has been used. Under that, we are going to consider this sales analysis. So, it addresses the current problems of the marketing. So, it helps us to know what is the current problem in the marketing, that is through sales analysis. Now, what do I mean by sales analysis? So, the business organization wanted to know what is the sale of their particular product in the market. So, analyzing the sales of a particular product is known as sales analysis. So, sales analysis is less costly and it contributes valuable feedback to carry out marketing research. Now, So it is less costly. So sales analysis is less costly and it contributes to get the valuable feedback. So as I've told you, it helps us to know or it helps us to compare the sales techniques or the marketing techniques. So thereby it is less costly and it contributes the appropriate feedback to carry out the marketing research. So the sales analysis is mainly used in marketing research. Now let us see what are the steps in sales analysis. So the first one is understanding sector-wise sales analysis. So there are various sectors in an organization, the two in the sales department. So sector-wise sales analysis. So what is the sale of a particular product? So what is the condition of that particular product in the market? So each and everything can be analyzed through this sales analysis. Next one is consumer classification, comparison and analysis. So we can classify the consumer based on their taste and preferences because normally the consumer will demand for the product. So depending upon their demand for the product, we can analyze the sales. So if the sales are more, it means that consumer are demanding the product. So there is lot of demand from the side of consumers. So it helps us to classify the consumer and comparison. So I have told you this is mainly used to compare from one year to another year and analysis. Next, third one, product wise classification and analysis. So consumer wise classification and analysis is done now according to the product. So whether which product has more demand, which product has less demand. So product wise we can make the analysis as well as classification. Next one is analyzing sales analysis on the basis of time period. So this I have already told you, it is mainly used for comparing from one year to another year. At the same time, from 1 month to another month, they can compare. So what would be the sales from 1 month when compared to the next month? So this can be analyzed through sales analysis. Next one is invoice analysis. So under internal secondary data, we have two types. One is sales analysis, other one is invoice analysis. Now let us see what is this invoice analysis. A firm's invoices are a good source of information for the research purpose. Now what do you mean by invoice? It is a documentary evidence in support of a particular transaction. Correct? So whenever the transaction takes place in an organization, this invoice will act as a documentary evidence. So here a firm's invoice is a good source of information for the research purpose. This invoice are segmented and analyzed while conducting the research. So depending upon the number of invoice what they have, by seeing the invoice they are going to analyze the research activity. The invoice for the customer is classified, separated segment wise and analyzed. Now whatever the invoice of the customers, so if the sales are more, of course the invoice should be there on the basis of that sales. So here they are going to analyze the invoice what is there in the organization. So thereby they can classify the consumer, they can separate according to the segment as well as analyzed. Next one, a person involved in the classifying, separating and analyzing invoice should be intelligent enough and he should be alert. Now, of course, in each and every activity in this collection of sources of data, so here each and every person should be very intelligent and he should be a skilled person because he has to know what are the activities that are going on, what are the documents which are relating to that, each and everything he has to know. So the person involved in classifying, separating as well as analyzing invoice, he should be a skilled person. So he should have knowledge about that particular topic. So that is about invoice analysis. So hope you are clear about internal secondary data. So the data which is inside the organization or within the organization, they are termed as what? Internal secondary data, where we are having two types. One is invoice analysis, other one is sales analysis. Coming to the next type, that is external secondary data. So we have learnt about under secondary data, we are having two main types. One is internal secondary data, other one is external secondary data. Now, what is external secondary data? It is opposite of internal secondary data. So, external secondary data is collected from the organization outside sources. Now, here what they are going to do, internal is inside, whereas inside or within the organization, whereas external secondary data is outside the organization. That is the data or information which is collected outside the organization. Now, for the research activity, where does the researcher will get the information? So, it may be internal sources or external sources. Now, coming to the external sources, from where they are going to collect. So, let us see later. Now, what do you mean by secondary or external secondary data? Which means what? The data or information, that is the secondary data or information which is collected outside the organization. External secondary data constitutes the data already collected by the government. Now, let us see where do we get this external secondary data. So, the data which is collected by the government or organizations, a researcher or any other person for the kind of purpose. So, you will have number of sources from external secondary data. So, let us see one by one here. So, the first one is libraries. Of course, we are familiar about libraries where lot of books will be arranged in a sequential order. Now, from the libraries also the researcher can collect the data because there are number of books which is relating to research activity or to the topic which is been selected by the researcher. So, he has lot of option to collect the information from the libraries. So, library is the best source of information to collect the secondary data. So, researcher may visit the libraries to search the information for their research needs. So, what they are going to do? So, he will go to the library and he will search the information according to the problem in order to solve that problem. According to his topic, what he has selected, so he will collect the information from the libraries. Libraries may be public, private, educational institutions, universities or general libraries set up by the individuals or by the organization. So, you have various types of library. It may be public library, private library, library of educational institutions, colleges and even the general library of a particular person or a particular organization. From there, the researcher can collect the information. Researchers often visit these centers because they provide printed books and information in electronic form also. Now, we have these online libraries or the electronic libraries where the information can be collected by the researcher very easily. Next one, beside this, journals, magazines, periodicals, etc. belonging to art, science, technology, politics, history, economics, trade industry, etc. are made available year-wise for each reference. Now, what they are going to do? So, library, earlier we used to visit the library and collect the information. Now, in the internet itself, we can go to the library and collect the information. So, due to that improvement in the technology, so sitting at one place, we can visit the library and we can collect the information. Next one is literature. So, literature is also one of the main secondary sources of collecting the information. So, there is a considerable amount of secondary data available on literature, especially for research purpose. So, there are number of literature based on a particular topic where the researcher can refer that and do his research activity. Details of researchers on various aspects of business in different countries are available in the form of publications. Now, how do we get this literatures? That is through the publications. So, even the not only confined to one country, from the various country we can collect the literature, that is through publications. Literature resources are increasingly being used by the researcher since national and international publications. So, I have told you literature will be available in the form of publication and it is not only confined to one country. From the various country we can collect the information, that is through national as well as international applications are available in variety of forms. So this is about the literature. So first one was library, where the researcher can go to the library or from the online library or from the electronic library, he can collect the information. And the next one was literature. So through literature also he can collect the information, that is in the form of publications. Next one is periodicals. So let us see how the information can be collected through periodicals. Periodicals are often used by the researchers to plan the business research. For this purpose, they review the periodicals published fortnightly, monthly, quarterly, half yearly and yearly, and collect the information for their research purpose. So you might have know about the periodicals. So they will publish half yearly, yearly or fortnightly, monthly publications are there, or monthly periodicals are there. So from there also the researcher can collect the information. Government and private organizations collect and publish information relating to economics, finance, business, transport, industry, labor and management aspects. So there are number of periodicals which is available. It may be private periodicals or government periodicals. So it will be in the form of monthly periodicals or quarterly, yearly, half yearly periodicals. So from there also the researcher can collect the information. Periodicals or journals are published exclusively on major topics such as industries, finance, human resource, accounting, marketing, taxation, revenue and expenditure, etc. So there are number of periodicals you can available or you can get from the various topics, so that the researcher can collect the information. Next one is census and registration. So let us see how the information can be collected through census and registration. So census and registration detail supplies necessary information for research activity. So this is also one of the main sources of secondary data. Previously, census work was limited to population census only. So if we hear the word census, we are confined only to the population, but it is not only the population. So for other activities also census is being conducted. So, but during these days, the scope of census get widened and now it extends to other sectors such as agriculture, animal husbandry, trade, transport, industry, banking, insurance and finance also. So, census means it is not only confined to population. So, here the scope of census has been widened now, where the census can be conducted on agriculture, animal husbandry, trade, transport, industry, education and few other aspects also. The data collected from these sources helps in conducting researches in the area of marketing, finance, industry, agriculture, labor, etc. So, through census as well as registration, even the researcher can collect the data, that is the census which is conducted in the previous years. Based on that information which has been already there, so from there the researcher can collect the information. Next one is trade associations. So there are number of trade associations from which the researcher can collect the information. The reports released by the trade association is a main source of information for research in the areas of industry, marketing, insurance, SSI, that is small scale industry, transport, etc. That is the report which is being published by the trade associations. One trade association belonging to an industry will exchange the report with another trade association of the other industry. This information may not be available from public libraries. So, these type of information will not be available in the public library. So, here the trade association is going to exchange their report. So, one trade association will exchange its report with other trade association because it will not be revealed to the public. So, here in the public library, we will not get such type of information. They are also not published in periodicals or by other publishers. So, this is confined not to all the public, it is confined only to a certain associations where they are going to exchange their reports. Next one is publication of central, state and local government. So you know about it, even the central, state and local government will publish something which can be used by the researchers. So publications of various departments of the government, that is central, state and local, provide useful data for research. Consolidated statistics or report forms the data provided by the agriculture, industry, transport, banking, finance and trade is a good source of data for the researchers. This data is available at various heads of the government. Now even the government has a pressure to report certain things, that is certain statistical things to the public. From there also the researcher can collect the information. So it may be relating to agriculture, industry, finance, transport, trade, etc. So on these issues even the central, state and local government will report or will publish statistical data. So district industry center, that is DICs, located in each district across the country have been engaged in collecting and publication of the data. So here who is going to collect? That is district industries center, where in each and every district they are located and it is their duty to collect as well as publish the data. Next one is private sources. Even there are certain private organizations where they publish their data, that is publish their informations. So data published by private organization in the form of books, newsletters, journals, trade reports, etc. provide the supplementary information. From there also the researcher can collect the information. This information is made available to the public on payment. So I have told you, so here all the secondary sources of data is not available to public. There are only certain sources which will be available directly to the public. Other than that, it is confined to certain parties. If the researcher wants certain things, like for example here private sources. So here the researcher has to pay for it and take the private sources. The publication may include opinions, statements and reports of different experts. So it is based on their wish, that is about the private sources. They can publish whatever they want in their publications. The subject discussed may include trade, commerce, finance, market, industry, insurance, transport, etc. So there are certain topics which will also be published by the private sources, but it is not available to the public. So it has to be obtained on demand or through the payment. Next one is industry and financial institutions. So this is also one of the secondary sources of collecting the data, where the data can be collected through financial institutions, that is industry and financial institutions from their publications. Sometimes certain types of industry and financial institution also publish various forms of information and statistics relating to their performance. So based on their performance, they are going to release certain statistical data to the public. So from there also the researcher can collect the information. So this type of data may help the researcher to continue their activities. So it's not that they are going to confine or they are going to stick on only to one particular source. So depending upon the topic of the researcher, he can select any of the sources. So these are the small sources from where the data can be collected by the researcher. Next one is international organization. So there are number of international organizations. They also publish certain important statistical data every year. From there also the researcher can collect the information. So international institutions such as International Monetary Fund, that is IMF, International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, that is IBRD, and United Nations Organization, that is UNO, and the offices of foreign countries will publish some useful statistics. So here also certain international organization, they will publish certain important issues to the public. The data may contain useful information on various issues relating to health, medicine, nutrition, poverty alleviation, industrial growth and prospectus, population growth, medicine, engineering, international finance, etc. So these are the statistical data which is issued by this international organization which may help the researcher. Next one is reference and bibliography. So what do you mean by reference and bibliography? There are a number of books as well as articles where the researcher can refer that is known as reference and bibliography. So all publications, so it is not only confined to books or any other articles, even all the online websites also act as a bibliography here. So all publications include reference and bibliography. So this will become an important source of data for the researcher. So you might have seen a book, that is, if you see a textbook here, so at the end of the page you will have the reference as well as bibliography, that is from where the author have collected the information. So it's not that he can write everything on his own, he will refer something. So what he has referred, he has to write in the form of reference and bibliography. So the given reference, text, link and website sources can be studied for furthering research work. So in order to do his research work, he has to refer something. So from what or from where he is going to refer, so that is called as what? Reference and bibliography. So the researcher can refer the encyclopedia. So here he can refer the encyclopedia also as an addition to continue his research studies. So this is about what is going to refer and conduct his research activity. Next one is volume of statistics. So I have told you there are a number of organizations as well as institutions who will publish their data in the form of statistics. So special statistical information is available in reports prepared by the researchers, social scientists and the economist. So some special type of statistics will also be published by certain researchers, social scientists as well as economists. From there also the researcher can collect the data. It provides the necessary information to expand the scope of research studies. So it's all that in order to expand the research activity, so these types of sources can be referred. Next one is advertising agencies. So they also give some certain information. So advertising agencies serves useful sources of business research studies. Many organizations that have come into existence to measure the effectiveness of advertising. So in order to see the effectiveness of advertising on their clients, publish some paper reviews. Now what they are going to do? So how an advertisement have affected the viewers, that is the consumers. So on that they are going to give some data, that is client publication, some peer reviews. So the reviews which is given by the customers on that particular advertisement can be published by the advertising agency in order to see through that how effective the advertisement is in the minds of public or in the minds of consumer. So they provide information on consumer behavior. So an advertisement, how it has affected the consumer. So based on their consumer behavior, consumption method. So whether their consumption method, what are the changes that have taken place in the consumption method of the consumer through that advertisement, and demographical features after conducting studies. So these are the few aspects which will be published by the advertising agencies. Next, other sources. Other than these all the secondary sources, let us see few of the other sources here. So other sources of data for research purpose include general opinions of public. So the opinion which is given by the public about a particular issue. So it also acts as a data for research activity. Specific opinion of the experts about a particular topic, opinion of some associations, marketing bodies, management association, separate business organization, local bodies, etc. So here what you have to remember, secondary data means what? The data which is collected outside the organization, that is external secondary data outside the organization, and it is not the fresh data where the researcher is going to collect for the first time. So it is already there or it is collected by some other person and the researcher is going to refer that. They are termed as secondary data. So we have seen few of the sources of secondary data here. So it may be advertising agency or any other associations or organizations. So from where the researcher is going to collect the data. So in my next session, I am going to discuss about the next topic, that is advantages and disadvantages of secondary data. So we shall see what is primary data, what are its advantages and disadvantages. So we have already learnt about it. Once again, we shall recall that, and the main topic is that what is secondary data we have discussed today, what are the advantages as well as disadvantages. Next, what is the main difference between primary and secondary data? Of course, in order to collect the data, both the sources are important. That is primary sources as well as secondary sources. Correct? So, that is primary method as well as secondary method. Now, what is the main difference between primary data as well as secondary data? So, that we are going to discuss in our next session. So, my dear students, hope you have understood today's session. See you all in my next session with a new topic. Till then, take care. Thank you.